In the last of the Sierra...
1968 was the year of student protest and revolt. It was the year in which tens of thousands of demonstrators marched through Western capitals and the streets echoed to the sound of their chants. The Vietnam War, dragging on into yet another year of destruction and killing, was the largest single cause of protest. But 1968 was also the year of near revolution in Paris in May and the year of the Prague Spring, when the mild reforms of the Czechoslovak government were abruptly ended by the arrival of Russian tanks in the streets of Prague. It was the year of war in Biafra, of the presidential election and assassinations in America. In a wave of protest throughout the West, youth confronted the forces of authority.
or rioting makes no sense whatsoever in the United States. If I'm elected President of the United States, I'm going to work for those who are deprived, those who are poor, those who lack jobs, those who lack decent education and lack a decent housing, whether they be white or black. That I pledge to.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
This will be an open administration, open to new ideas, open to men and women of both parties, open to the critics as well as those who support us. We want to bridge the generation gap. We want to bridge the gap between the races. We want to bring America together.
Images of events in 1968 were flashed around the world. Vietnam was called the first television war. Viewers could see pictures of violence and horror each evening in their living room. But the origins of this communications revolution go back to the early days of television. Until 1955, BBC News was called a television newsreel. In the mid-50s, the style of television news was modelled on that of the cinema newsreel. The camera crews tended to stand back from an event and look in on it. Cameras were cumbersome, and synchronous sound had to be recorded on the film in the camera. An umbilical cord joined the cameraman and the sound recordist. In 1955, when commercial television began broadcasting, 4.5 million families in Britain had television. By 1968, over 15 million homes had at least one television set. By this time, enormous advances in 16mm film technology transformed the role of TV news. Film equipment was lighter and so more portable. Sound could be recorded separately, whilst ensuring perfect sync with the picture. Sound and camera could then be far more mobile and no longer needed to stand back from events. And the speed with which pictures could be dispatched and transmitted gave them greater urgency. But it was not just changes in technology that changed the style of TV news. By the late 1960s, attitudes had changed. News programs were much longer. The new journalism called for a more aggressive, hard-hitting style and a more forthright presentation.
The Apollo spaceflight is okay again. In the fourth strike, the Unions win the first round.
Following the American example, ITN began Britain's first half-hour news program in 1967, with news at 10.
Good evening. Rusty Schweikhardt.
The BBC later followed, with the 20-minute main news at 9 o'clock. These formats have stayed with British television ever since. One event captured on news film in the autumn of 1968 proved to have enormous consequences for the United Kingdom over the ensuing years. The affairs of Northern Ireland were far from the minds of most Britons in 1968. After centuries of conflict with Ireland, it was widely believed in Britain that the Troubles were a thing of the past. Northern Ireland was rarely discussed in the British press or television, and the emergence of a civil rights movement calling for social and political reforms in the province went almost unnoticed in Britain. On the 5th of October, a civil rights march was planned in Londonderry, one of the Protestant and Unionist strongholds in the Unionist-dominated province. The local Home Affairs Minister banned the march from passing through the centre of the city, but it went ahead anyway. The police told the marchers of the areas they were prohibited from marching through.
Any person who wishes to parade or hold a meeting is quite at liberty to do so, provided he holds it other than in an area specified in the order made by the minister. They may be well advised to leave this area.
The civil rights demonstrators objected to Protestant control over regional and local government in Northern Ireland. They wanted sweeping reforms to ensure equal opportunities for Catholics. Their leaders appealed for restraint in the march.
We will act in a responsible manner, demonstrating to the authorities that our intentions are to secure civil rights for the people of our cities and not to cause strife or bloodshed in our city. We are demanding homes, employment, freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. We do not wish bloodshed or violence.
Large police reinforcements had been brought to Derry for the day. When the marchers set off, they found themselves surrounded by police, determined not to allow the march to go forward, but also blocking its retreat.
We are the people of Derry, and we intend marching on ourselves. We welcome you, sir.
But civil liberties, I really thought we came here for. Then get the civil liberties, get Jerry Pitt and the rest of the men in the world.
In the ensuing scuffles, the police baton charged the marchers. The scenes of violence that followed took place in full view of the TV cameras. This film, with its natural sound, was shot by a crew working for Irish television in Dublin. It was sold to TV companies throughout the world. That night on television news in Britain, horrified viewers saw policemen in a part of the United Kingdom attacking marchers whose slogan was, "One man, one vote." There had been several civil rights marches before, but none of them had attracted much interest outside Ireland. But the TV coverage transformed this event. James Callaghan, then Home Secretary, in charge of law and order in the United Kingdom, wrote of the events of this day, "The television cameras were present in force, and pictures of the extraordinary scenes of violence and fighting were flashed all over the world. Ulster had arrived in the headlines." Whilst civil rights were the main source of agitation in Northern Ireland, it was opposition to the war in Vietnam that brought protesters onto the streets of Britain. In 1968, there were a series of anti-war marches in London. This colour footage of the demonstration on the 17th of March was taken by one of the largest news film agencies, Viz News. Film agencies exist to supply raw news film to TV stations throughout the world, and much television news film derives from agencies. On the 17th of March, 15,000 demonstrators marched to the American Embassy in Grosvenor Square to protest over American policy in Vietnam and against the British government's support for the war. The anti-Vietnam War protest movement that clashed so violently with the police in 1968 differed in many ways from the anti-war protest movements that had preceded it. It was primarily a student youth movement, organized and led by students. And unlike the movement for nuclear disarmament, many student protesters believed that violent confrontation with the police was a necessary feature of the protest, a way of expressing opposition to the state and the policies of government. There was a considerable debate in 1968 about the role of television news in reporting events like these. The presence of the TV cameras was thought to incite riotous behavior, and television was accused of concentrating on the violence of the minority and of ignoring the grievance of the majority. The criticism that television not only reports events but has an effect on those events is still heard today. Whilst there is no direct evidence to say that the presence of TV cameras actually encourages violence, the TV coverage of some marches in 1968 certainly transformed the effect of these marches, and the battles for Grosvenor Square became full-scale media events. But news was just the front page of television journalism. Analysis, features, and background explanations were provided by current affairs programs. The BBC had 24 Hours and Panorama. ITV had rediffusions This Week and Granada's World in Action, which carried a full half-hour film report of the demonstration in Grosvenor Square in March 1968.
Sunday, March the 17th, London. These people believe world politics are in a mess. For them, the gold rush and its consequences, the resignation of George Brown, and American policy in Vietnam are all symptoms of that mess. A number of these people are students who call themselves the new radical left. They are determined and believe their most effective weapon is mass action and even violence. A number of others believe in the cause, but are less certain about the method. All want to bring about a radical social and political change, and they're no longer prepared to sit down and sing for it. They claim to be part of a worldwide rebellion of youth spreading from the United States to communist Europe. Today, in the House of Commons, charges of brutality were made against both police and demonstrators. Tonight, World in Action allows you to judge for yourself the demonstration. 3:45. 15,000 people begin their march on the American embassy. Their intention is to demonstrate and hand in an official note of protest about the war. They are determined the police will not stop them. .20 Grosvenor Square. The riot you will see is the most violent London can remember.
World in Action had 5 camera teams filming the demonstration. The portability of their film equipment meant that they no longer had to look in at events from outside, but they could also be part of the march, mixing with the demonstrators and the police and moving with the crowd. The perspective that this gave was quite unlike anything that had gone before. The film shot during the afternoon of the Sunday demonstration by the 5 crews was viewed during the Sunday night and edited during Monday. It was shown that Monday evening, the day after the march. During the editing of the film, the editors made certain that the number of blows the police were seen to give the demonstrators equaled the number of blows received by the police, to ensure balance and to avoid accusations of biased reporting. But the near riot in March 1968 was not repeated again in London. There were other anti-Vietnam War protests, but none were as violent. On the 27th of October, 60,000 anti-war demonstrators marched through London. After events in Paris and Chicago, it was widely believed that the October demonstration would bring major rioting and disorder to London. The Home Secretary was asked to have the military standing by. 100 policemen guarded the BBC's broadcasting house in case an attempt was made to take it over. But the march passed off largely peacefully. The leaders of the march appealed for a peaceful demonstration, and the police adopted a policy of minimum intervention. But the march became an enormous media event. The BBC used 13 film crews and 6 outside broadcast units to cover it. ITN used 17 film crews and 4 OB units. ITN also carried a 1-hour live report on the demonstration from 4 to 5 p.m. In the face of such media activity, violence became almost inevitable. When a breakaway group of 4,000 left the main march and moved into Grosvenor Square, the minor disturbances that followed were given a totally disproportionate amount of attention, and the peaceful rally in Hyde Park was ignored. BBC News and ITN's live programme concentrated on the scuffles in Grosvenor Square, and when the ITN presenter was asked why so much attention was being given to the minority outside the American embassy, he replied, "Nothing else is really happening elsewhere." In 1968, anti-war protest reached a peak in Britain. But the expectations of violence associated with this protest became almost self-fulfilling. And by concentrating on incidents of violence, television repeatedly ignored the issues which prompted this protest.
Next week's final programme of the series focuses on last year's conflict in the south.